started, is it okay to turn the lights on?
Sure.
I think the sconces will be on, so it won't be dark.
Yeah, yeah. Might not.
Well, good evening, everyone. How are we doing this evening? I am John Mann, Director of Education for Lakeside, and for this evening we're fortunate to have Jim Tomko with us again this year during the biggest week in birding. This evening's Owls of Ohio will explore the 12 species which have been spotted in Ohio. Several are residents, some are migrants, and a few are accidental visitors. Concerning our presenter, Jim has been birding scientifically since 1979 at Miami University, where he majored in zoology. He earned a master's degree in environmental biology and a doctorate in optometry from the Ohio State University, which helped him support his habit of immersion in nature. A quick reminder, we have additional programs scheduled for this week. Tomorrow, Vern Bingham's talk will be on the Lake Erie landscape and the flight behavior of migratory birds. Thursday, Holly Merker will lead a bird walk at 10:30 in the morning from the train station pavilion, and then give a talk that evening on ornithotherapy, the power of bird watching. And then lastly, on Friday, Arthur Pearson of the Roger Torrey Peterson Institute will give a talk on the legacy and inspiration of Roger Torrey Peterson. And I do ask at the conclusion of this evening's session, as always, as you leave Orchestra Hall, there are evaluation forms that really do help me when it comes to programming for the future. What are you interested in? What topics, speakers, et cetera, et cetera. And then lastly, if you would please mute your cell phone ringers, that is appreciated. But without further ado, please welcome Jim Tomko.
Thank you, John. I didn't know I was going to get a report card after this. Well, it's an honor to be here, and I'm representing the Audubon Society of Greater Cleveland. I'm the current president, and if you guys ever want to join a chapter, we'd be glad to have you. But tonight, I have the fortunate occurrence of being able to, with lots of passion, one of my favorite groups of birds. So I'm glad you guys are here to hear about this, and some of you may have come last year. I have rearranged it a little bit, so you might learn some new things. You might see some familiar pictures. You'll see some new pictures. And a lot of these pictures, I don't know if any of you were able to make last night's lecture from Matt Valenza, a good friend of mine. A lot of the pictures I'm going to show you are some that he shared with me. And I was out, just came from McGee to be here this evening, and there's lots of good warblers out there coming through. So if you heard his lecture last night, you can expect to have some of those birds show up on your shoreline here. So try to make that bird walk tomorrow morning. And you've got a great lineup of speakers, thanks to John. So pay attention, they're out there, and you don't see them unless you look. So that is great that you guys got that going. Let's see. Oh, just thought I'd get a start with a little song from one of our friends here. So we're going to talk about the 12 species that have occurred in Ohio, but there's a few other things I'd like to go over first. Because of their mysterious nocturnal ways and their predatory habits, these birds have fascinated our kind since recorded history began. I like this little cartoon here. I don't know if you guys can see. Let me see if I can magnify it a little bit here so you can see that. Just kind of fun because we always think about our days, but they usually start their day about right now. This is an etching in a cave that is estimated to be about 30,000 years old. It was, we think, the Eurasian eagle owl because it does have these little feather tufts up here. And these are likely snowy owls in a cave etching. These etchings, if you think about 30,000 years ago, it was during the Ice Age. These are from a European cave, and they were right on the edge of the glaciers. So snowy owls make sense right in Europe. Now, owls have been the symbols of good and evil, wisdom and foolishness, good fortune, calamity, visitors from the underworld, and messages from the afterlife. Different cultures have looked at owls differently. This is 5,000-year-old art from ancient Egypt. And in fact, the goddess Athena is often accompanied by owls in her depictions. She was the goddess of wisdom, as most of you probably already know. And it's likely that these little owls are actually called little owls. That's the species that likely adorned Athena. They are really habituated to human habitation. They love to nest in little cracks and crevices in construction. So the Colosseum and the Parthenon, they lived in and about there. Their main prey are insects. And interestingly, the British Empire in the mid-1800s noticed that these owls didn't mind being around humans, and they thought they like to eat insects. Maybe, just maybe, if we put them in our homes, they could take care of our cockroaches. It didn't work very well. It didn't last long. And in our country, Native Americans revered the owl too. But the northwestern tribes in Oregon and Washington, they had a saying, if you heard the owl call your name, the problem is that meant you were on your way to the happy hunting grounds. So you did not want to hear the owl call your name. Even Disney celebrated owls with his Winnie the Pooh tale, and then very clever name for this one owl. And I always wondered, many of the professional sports teams choose mascots that are birds, like a blue jay and a cardinal, an eagle, and a seahawk. I hesitate to go to this next one if any of you guys are from Cleveland. The Ravens, that was back before 1996. They were not the Ravens. But, so the professional teams don't seem to think that owls are a good mascot, but some of the colleges get it. Temple University, Rice, and Florida Atlantic University, they all use owls as their mascot. And owls are pretty fierce, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Many people want to celebrate with body art, so we've got a tattoo of an owl. That's a little bigger one, yep. A little more realistic. That's getting a little bit too big. Now, I love owls, so I want to show you a picture of my tattoo. I'm just kidding. I don't have any tattoos, but that's a little bit over the top, I think. That must have taken a long time to do, and I bet it was very painful. But anyway, let's talk about some of the fantastic adaptations that occurred so that owls could really earn their living so successfully after dark. One is eyes, and you guys heard that I'm an optometrist, so their eyes have fascinated me. It's interesting to me that an owl's eye, if you think about a great horned owl, which is only about 20 inches tall and weighs about 4 pounds, his or her eyes weigh about 5% of their body. So that's a lot of eye. But the thing is, if I multiply it up to someone my size, that means I would have eye apparatus that weigh about 5 pounds. That's a lot of vision. Their eyes are so big that they can't really move them very easily in their sockets. They do a lot of head turning in order to determine location and range. But they're said to be able to see, we used to say about 40 times better than human eyes at night. Now we're thinking more like 100 times better than humans at night. So they can work easily by candlelight 30 feet away from the candle without having any problem. But they need some light to see. You know, owls can't see in the pitch black. They can actually move around, but they need light to see. In order to see something, you have to have light entering your eye, reflecting on the retina, and stimulating those nerves. The other part, their eyes are amazing, but the other superlative sense is their sense of hearing. And if you look at these owls, these little feather discs here, they're like parabolic antennas. and they can actually change the shape of that antenna depending on what they're trying to hear. They have little muscles at the base of these feather tracks, and they can just adjust them like focusing on a camera to sharpen things up and find out just where that sound is coming from. Kind of work like this. We all have done that before. I have this friend of mine that I go birding with, and he has better hearing than I do because I can't hear the high frequencies as well as I used to, and he's always yelling at me, "Put your hands up by your ears, put your hands up by your ears." I should bring one of these someday and say, "Hey, how do you like this one?" But that's how they do it. And the owl's ears are pretty large openings. Look, it's almost as big as their eye opening, one on each side of the head. And in order to really triangulate well and find exactly where their prey is, many species have their ear openings in different locations, one high and one low. And that way, as sound energy hits their ear, they can tell exactly what direction they are coming from. In a larger animal like we are, our ears are set further apart, so that gives us pretty good stereo. But a small head like this, that helps to increase the stereo hearing. It's thought that they can hear 30 millionths of a second difference as our sound hits either ear. That helps them find out where their prey is. Now, maybe you guys are better than this, but I don't know what a million of anything is. It just seems like it's too big a number to even think about. So I looked it up. If you stacked single dollar bills one on top of each other, a million of them would be about as tall as a 35-story building. Or if you put quarters next to each other, they would stretch over a mile long. So if you take 30 of those out, just 30, that's the difference between the sound hitting those ears that these owls can make use of. So that is pretty astounding to me. Great gray owls, they are said to be able to hear a vole underneath more than a foot of snow. They don't have to see it. They can hear it under the snow, in the grass and the leaves, and they can pounce on it and be successfully catching it. The other thing they have, because they can't turn their eyes well, we talked about a moment ago, they have special abilities to turn their head. Now, humans have 7 cervical or neck vertebrae. Do you know how many a giraffe has? 7. But the owls have 14. So that allows 270-degree movement. It used to be thought that owls could turn their heads all the way around. And the reason for that is, I figured it out because this happened to me before. You're in the woods, and you're looking up at a tree, and you see an owl up there, and you're walking around the tree, and he's kind of following you with his head like this, and you're looking, and you stumble for a second, and then you look back up, and he's already whipped his head around, and he can follow you the rest of the way. So people used to think they could turn 360 degrees, but they can't. It's really 270. But the neat thing about their cervical vertebrae, they have very large openings for the blood vessels to run, so they can turn their head and not squeeze those blood vessels closed and just go right along their life without any problem. Here's one, too, that's trying to figure out how far something is by adjusting their head position for both eyes and ears. Now, another thing that they have is special flight feathers. So I'm going to show you this for a moment. If you look at the edge of the feathers, it's kind of frayed on both the top and the bottom. And what that does is it allows to silence the feather sounds through the air. Because if you whip anything through the air, you get that sound. But owls don't have that because they have these soft edges and they can silently appear. So if you've ever been out trying to find an owl and you do discover one flying in, you don't hear them flying in. It's just like an apparition. It suddenly appears. It's just floating above your head and lands in a tree. It's pretty astounding that they can just land without any kind of sound or noise of flight, which helps them catch the prey. Other things that help them catch prey are these 1-inch talons. This is a great horned owl, which we have around here, but these are 1-inch talons. You can see them on that. And that grip is arranged so that they have 2 toes facing backwards, 2 toes facing forwards, and the grip has the same force as a Rottweiler's bite. So basically, if you're in an owl's talons, you are not getting away. Then they have the typical predatory bird bill. It looks unusual when it's covered by feathers, but actually if you take the feathers off, it looks just like a regular raptor-type bill. These feathers around the bill, again, they have extrasensory perception almost at the base of these feathers, so they can rearrange their bite to dispatch their prey instantly by making adjustments when they feel how the prey is moving, how they've gripped it. Those feathers signal to the brain, switch this way, switch that way. So we're talking about predatory birds. Raptors is what we categorize them as. And so we look at the eagle, and that's a bird of prey too. But are owls related to hawks and eagles? I mean, people might think that because it seems like they have similar habits and they have similar weapons. But actually, they're not very closely related to hawks and raptors. Those are in a whole different family, or a whole different branch of the family tree. But look at these are common birds that we have in migration. The whippoorwill comes through here. And you say, well, maybe it looks a little bit like an owl, but look how big those eyes are. They're night birds too. Here's the chuck-will's widow, for those of you that spend some time down south or on the southeast coast. Again, looks a little bit like owl, but I still think you need a little more convincing of if owls related to these. But how about this one from the other hemisphere? The tawny frogmouth. Now that's starting to look a lot like an owl, isn't it? So these birds are actually the same branch of the family tree as owls. All right. Now, a lot of people say, oh, I never see owls. I don't think they're around here. But I'm going to show you why you're not seeing owls. Can you see an owl there? There's his two eyes. There's his tail. They look just like part of that tree. If you're walking through the woods and not paying attention, you'll walk right by that bird. There's another view of an owl next to a tree trunk. Amazing camouflage. Now you might have seen a picture of this before if you were at Matt's talk. This came from McGee Marsh, actually, and there's a little screech owl right there. Give it a little bigger picture, and then we'll put them next to each other. So you can see this owl. You could walk by that and not realize he's there. And this is from another year at McGee. It might be the same owl, but there he is in a little bit of a cavity. And again, you could walk right by that bird and not even know he's there. And I think this is pretty cool too. These birds know that if their eyes are wide open, they're easier to spot. But if they close their eyes, so this is the same bird, same cavity, open eyes, you can spot them pretty well. Closed eyes, blends right in. So here's a picture that I wanted to demonstrate for you. There are actually more than one owl in this picture. Now you can see the whitewash here, which helps us discover where owls are. And maybe you can make out the little owlet right here. But can you see Mama right there? And that's why they have those little feather tufts on their ears, because it looks like it's a little snag on the tree. So it's kind of amazing how they can blend right in. It's pretty good sized birds, but they can blend right in. You don't even know they're there. This is something that always bugs me a little bit. So you guys know that's not an owl. But lots of people say, oh, I hear owls every morning. But that's actually this bird singing right here. So when you hear that coo, coo, coo in the morning, it's not an owl, it's a mourning dove. And so you have to kind of educate your neighbors and say, no, it's probably not an owl. Let's talk about owl extremes a little bit. And I want to know what's the biggest, what's the smallest. And the smallest owl in the whole world is actually part of the United States native fauna. You have to go to the desert southwest to see them, but this is the smallest owl in the world. These guys only weigh 1.5 ounces, which means if you put them in a, that's his call. Doesn't sound much like a hoot. But they weigh only 1.5 ounces, so you could put 2 stamps on an envelope and send them across country. I wanted to show you the size comparison, because they're only about the size of our white-breasted nuthatch. So here's an owl in the hand. So you can see they're just about the same size. Wouldn't that be cute to see a little owl like that? But they don't come into our area. One thing about these little owls, though, is they are fierce as any of the other owls. Look at his favorite food, a scorpion. And they have lots of scorpions in the desert southwest. They know how to do this without getting stung. So the smallest owl is pretty easy to find by weight and size. But let's talk about the biggest owl. And that is a little more controversial. It depends on how you describe what is big. Because if we look at the snakes of the world, the reticulated python is the longest snake in the world. I think the longest one measured 32 feet long. It goes 200, 300 pounds. But the heaviest snake in the world is the South America's anaconda, which is only about 28 feet long only. But it goes 400 to 500 pounds. So I don't know which you'd say is bigger. One weighs more, one's longer. But the longest owl is the Eurasian eagle owl. I don't mean longest, but the biggest wingspan to weight ratio. Its wingspans are over 6 feet long. A bald eagle's is 80 inches long, so they're not quite that long, but it's a big bird. And I love the color of their eyes, those orangey eyes. You might have heard in the news recently about that eagle owl that escaped from a New York zoo and it was living in New York City in Central Park for a while. It didn't make it because it shouldn't have been there, and it wasn't accustomed to all the dangers of cars and things like that. But it was loose for about 3 or 4 weeks, I think, before it was discovered that it was an auto accident with it. But they're almost 30 inches from tip of the bill to the tip of the tail. That's a pretty long owl. We have one that's longer, though. And they go about 6 to 9 pounds. I wanted to show you their eyes again. I'm just, fascinated by eyes. Most people are attracted to eyes. So this we'd say is the longest wingspan of an owl. But there's another owl that's bigger weight-wise. That is the Blakiston's fishing owl, which is a Siberian owl that comes from northern Japan, Siberia, North Korea, and they can weigh up to 10 pounds. And it's kind of fun to think about an owl that's an expert fisherman. They actually do catch fish, and they don't mind cold weather. There's one catching fish through the ice. They're ice fishermen, too. Their wingspan's a little shorter, but like I said, they can go up to 10 pounds. But the very longest one is from our country again. Well, actually, it's circumpolar, the great gray owl throughout the whole world. It's at northern latitude. They are very long. They're, I think, about 33 inches, tip of bill to tip of tail, but they're all feathers. They're long, but they only weigh about 2 to 3 pounds, so a bunch of feathers there. But they have to have those feathers for the cold weather that they live in. And again, some of these pictures are from my friend Matt Valensic because he went up to northern Minnesota a couple years ago because he wanted to see a great gray owl and some other northern specialties. You're going to hear the call. That one actually sounds like a hooting owl. Their wingspan is a little shorter than those other large owls, about 60 inches. And like I said, they're experts in snow because they can hear those voles right through the snow. You don't want to be a vole if this is coming towards you. Of course, the vole doesn't know because it's under the snow, and all of a sudden it's snatched. So let's talk about some rare and accidental owls in the United States. There's 3 species that I always said not likely to ever be seen in Ohio again. But again, my friend Matt Valensic, he went down to Arizona and he picked one of these up on his birding trip down there just a few weeks ago. Not this one. This is the Stygian owl from South America. It's related to one of our owls, the long-eared owl. I'm going to show you a picture of that sometime tonight. Then we have the mottled owl. This is the one he found. Only 1 or 2 records of it have happened in this country, and they were delighted to be able to find one of these in southwestern Arizona. And then we have the oriental scops owl, which was on one of the Pribilof Islands off Alaska. So it barely made it into our country, but we count it as one of the rare wanderers. But now let's talk about some rare owls. We're getting to Ohio owls now. There's actually 19 species that live in our country. 22 species have been detected here, and those 3 of them I just showed you. But Ohio's a great state for owls because of those 19, 12 of them have lived here or wandered here. And the only other state, and again, we're not too far from Michigan. I hate to say this because I'm an Ohio State grad, but Michigan also has 12 species that have visited them. All the other states contiguous to Ohio, they have less than 12, so we're pretty good with that. One of them is the boreal owl, and there may be a lot more of these in Ohio that we know of because they're very nocturnal, and they would only come down during the winter time, so they might be here, and we just don't know it because they haven't been detected. But in 1997 in Lake County, there was a window strike that conked one out, and he was rehabbed and released, so he flew back to where he needed to go. But that was over in Lake County. This is another one that might be seen more frequently, but people don't recognize what it is, the northern hawk owl, and they rarely come this far south. And it doesn't look, it looks like an owl, but not quite. You can mistake it for a hawk if you're driving by. So they might be more common than we think just because people don't recognize that it actually is an owl. And the third one is the burrowing owl. And those of you that have spent some time in Florida, in Fort Myers area, that's the one where they rope off the sidewalk areas because they actually have burrows down in there. Then there's a gap in their distribution throughout Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi, and then they start again in the Great Plains. So we don't know why there's a gap there in their distribution, but they might be separate subspecies. But they actually are one of the few owls that act, and you look at those long legs, but they will dig holes or take over burrowing animal holes and lay their eggs there. And this is the great gray owl again. Only 2 documented sightings. One of them was in Mahoning County, which is on the eastern border of Ohio. The other one is Ottawa County, which is right where we are. It was seen in 1947 by Milt Troutman, if any of you know him. He was a big fish person in Ohio at one point. And it was on Starve Island. And have you been to Starve Island? If you ever went to Put-in Bay, when the ferry comes to South Bass Island, where it puts to shore, there's a little island there that sometimes it's awash and you can't see it, sometimes it's high and dry. That's Starve Island. And the great gray owl was perched there one time, and they saw it and documented it there. So those are the rare wanderers, and we hope we get some other ones sometime. But now that leaves 8 species that we can see every year if you're in the right place at the right time. And 4 are migratory, 1 is threatened, and 3 require extensive forests. So Ohio's coming back with their forests, so we'll see what happens with that as it goes on. But take a look at the snowy owl. This is our largest owl. Weigh up to 6 pounds, and it has a 52-inch wingspan, and we have periodic eruptions. This is the first year in years and years that we didn't have a snowy owl in Ohio. They usually come down. It's usually the youthful ones because they're not strong enough to get on territory and defend it against an adult that's already there. So the parents kick them out and say, there's not enough food for all of us. You guys got to go somewhere. And a lot of them that are found in Ohio are emaciated because they don't know how to hunt yet, and they're off their normal grounds. But they love wind-swept shorelines because it's similar to the Arctic. And Burke Lakefront Airport in Cleveland usually hosts a few. Hopkins Airport hosts a few. And when they do have their eruptions, they go as far south as Bermuda, Jacksonville, Florida. There was even one in Hawaii one time because they were moving south and trying to find a place, and they seemed to like airports near a shoreline. They're pretty unmistakable when you see them. And you wonder why they're colored that way. Here's why. In the tundra, there's weeds that might stick above the snow, and so they can blend in pretty nicely. The females and the juveniles are pretty spotted. The males are a little more immaculate. Here's the snowy owl calling. I think I have to encourage this one. Let me poke him a little bit here. So it kind of sounds a little bit like hooting. Okay. There's another one. Now, we used to wonder what happened because we would see these owls in early winter, and then they'd vanish. And we wondered, where'd they go? Did they go back north? They aren't reported south, so I wonder what happened to them. There's a project called Project Snowstorm, and you guys can follow it online if you want to, but they have banded these owls, and they discovered that what these owls do, some of them do go back north, but what happens is as Lake Erie freezes, they follow the ice sheet out as the water gets further away, so nobody's walking out on the ice to find these owls, and what they're doing is they're following the duck flocks because they love a duck dinner. And so the ducks get more concentrated, and when Lake Erie completely freezes, which has been a few years since that happened, they would probably have to go back north. But they just hang out at the edge of the ice, and they capture a duck, have dinner, and then they wait for their next meal. But they follow the ice sheet out, and then as the ice melts, they come back. So that's why there was a gap. In midwinter, we wouldn't see them, but in early and late winter, we would because they're right at the edge of the ice where the ducks are. I'll just have to show some owlets. These are the ones. They nest on the ground. And they're excellent lemming capturers. If owl pair is raising young, I think they can take, what I read, up to 1,500 lemmings in a season. And the neat thing about snowy owls, it's cold up there, right? And so these are all lemmings surrounding the nest. So these little babies have to reach out and grab one. But they're in the refrigerator because it's frozen. And they can store as many as they want there and just wait till they need them. Also, the snowy owl is the one that was made famous in the Harry Potter books. Hedwig was his name. And unfortunately, this didn't happen in our country because we have rules against capturing wild birds, but in Europe, they tried to make them pets. That phase is kind of gone. But people loved the Harry Potter books. They wanted to have Hedwig in their home and realized it wasn't really a good pet. A similar looking owl, but much smaller, is the barn owl. And that's probably not part of Ohio's native fauna, because before Europeans cleared the forest, we didn't have prairies and open areas in Ohio, and these birds need open areas. They cross over back and forth a field looking for mice and voles and small shrews and things like that. They were first recorded in Ohio in the 1800s. Prior to that, we didn't really probably have any, maybe in some of the rare prairie relics. And there was a steep decline until in the 1950s, and it bottomed out about 1990. So they became threatened in Ohio, even though they weren't part of the original fauna. But now we're lucky to have about 50 pairs. And this is my default owl as far as size. So they weigh about a pound. They're about 16 inches tall. And so when you think about a barn owl, that's kind of what I compare other owls to. This is neat. This owl has fallen on every single continent in the world, every single continent except for Antarctica. They might be several subspecies or maybe even different species, but they all look alike. People are studying that right now. Some people call it the monkey-faced owl because of the way it's shaped, or that facial disc is something like a heart. And look at this one, has dark brown eyes. The other ones we were looking at all had that bright yellow or orangey eyes. This one has brown eyes. And they have excellent camouflage. Here's one sitting in a tree right there. This is compliments of Matt Valensic again. And they course over a field, as I mentioned, looking for it. And they have long legs, too, because when they're coming down on a tussock of grass, they've got to get those talons down through to catch that mouse. But they're one that needs opening. They don't really nest in forests. They nest in hollows. I mean, they could nest in a hollow tree, but they really have become habituated to human barns, and as long as they're not closed up too tight. This is the owl that haunts houses and barns. And if you can imagine being a kid and entering a barn or house at night and you hear this and see this white thing above you, you'd run out of there thinking, there's a ghost in there. The nice thing is a lot of farmers now that are interested in wildlife are producing owl boxes in their barn. So this is a cavity opening, but it doesn't open into the barn. It opens into a box on the inside. And so they're making a comeback. And I don't know if you'll think this is cute or not, but I have to show the owlets. And I think a mother barn owl would say, oh, they're so cute, but there they are. Now for our Ohio's smallest owl is the saw-whet. They have two calls. Now, I've never heard a saw being wet. Maybe some of you have, but maybe it sounds like that. I don't know. But it's called a saw-whet because it supposedly sounds like somebody sharpening a saw. And again, they're very docile. If that owl was in a tree near you, they wouldn't move. They'd either keep their eyes closed or just say, some people have been able to lift them off their branch and put them back and they weren't disturbed at all. It's kind of strange for such a little owl to be so brave. They do another really fun thing. I don't know if you can see them right here. They also will catch more prey than they need. But again, remember, they spend a lot of time in cold areas. And so what they'll do is cache these mice in a cavity where they freeze solid. And then when it's time to eat and they can't find a live one, they'll take it out and incubate it like an egg and warm it up, defrost it, and they'll eat it. So they get a nice warm meal. It's amazing what nature figures out. Here's another call. So they migrate through Ohio in November and in March. So that's the best time to find them. Rarely do they nest here. They're pretty small, though. Like I said, only about the size of a pop can. So you can see how that's an adult right there. And sometimes you can find them in the cavity. Here's how they find the cavities. Someone has to make it for them. They can't drill it themselves. So they look for an abandoned flicker hole or another woodpecker that has it large enough. And here are the little faces looking out. They're hard to find. So you want to look in grape tangles. You want to look in evergreens. And especially if you have like an evergreen island surrounded by open areas, that's a lot of times where they'll be. And here's a group of them looking down from a tree. The owlets. This is closely related to the boreal owl, which I mentioned earlier, which is a rare visitor to Ohio, but they're so nocturnal you hardly find them. And these guys, oftentimes you can find them along the lakefront. So even out here, if you have an evergreen near the lakefront during migration, they might show up there as they're roosting there. Another migratory one is a little bigger. It's called the long-eared owl, and of course those are not ears. And here's a hoot owl too, isn't it? These guys rarely nest in Ohio. They usually use abandoned hawk or a crow nest right out in the open. And if you look at how long those tufts are, we'll compare them to a great horn later, but they can be confused, but not if they were side by side. Again, this owl is a little smaller than the barn, only about 9 ounces, but similar size. And they do the same thing. They course over the fields at night looking for mice and voles and shrews and things like that might be out and about. I like the little orange facial discs here too. Excuse me, sorry. Now these birds are also quite circumpolar. Excuse me. And I wanted to show you, well, you guys have heard of a group of owls. They're called a parliament of owls. Well, these guys can sometimes, I want to show you the young ones, these can roost in groups. So you can see a bunch of them here. One Canadian parliament numbered 100 owls. Can you imagine 100 long-eared owls all together? They're also known as a wisdom or a glaring, a stooping or a bizarre. Those are all names for groups of owls. In Serbia, there was a huge group that would commute every day. They were known to roost in the city where there were trees, and they go out at night to the farms where there were no trees but lots of rodents. So they'd come back and forth, and people would watch them fly out to the country to work, and they'd come back in the city to roost. That'd be kind of fun to watch that. So let's compare these two. This is that rare Stygian owl that showed up in Texas and Arizona. It looks a lot like this one. They are very closely related, but this one is a South American owl. They would probably never cross paths because this is more of a northern bird. Now the short-eared, you have long-eared owl. We have the short-eared owl, right? So you see a little tiny feather tufts there. This one's neat because it's a ground nester. It really doesn't need trees. It nests in fields, and I'll show you a nest in a moment. But I think this is the most easily studied owl in Ohio because they're active at twilight. They're not particularly nocturnal. They're not on the daytime, but if you go to a field area at twilight, you might see this owl during migration. Sometimes they'll spend the winter in this area, but usually they go a little farther south. But again, they hunt on the wing, quartering the fields, and they have very sharp vision, very sharp hearing, and they're looking for movement, listening for movement, looking for mice. A lot of these birds can actually view an ultraviolet light reflection on a urine trail, because as you might know, mice, as they move along, they're constantly dripping urine, and so they can follow that trail right up to where the mouse might be. This is the hoot of a short-eared owl. Not much of a hoot, is it? These are guys are widespread too. They're found on every continent except Antarctica and Australia. They haven't made it to Australia. But if you ever hear of an owl that's on an island, like the Hawaiian owl is actually a short-eared owl. They seem to be across large areas of water. And they've got really great wings to do that. Nice and long. And you can see this little beige patch here. Some things are hard to determine what they are because when they're flying, you just see a flash of brown. But some things tip you off. That one's on patrol there, and you can sort of see this little dark spot at the angle of his wing. And that, oh, wait a minute. Is that an owl? No, this one's not an owl, but they actually compete for the same niche. This is a northern harrier, which is a true hawk. This is a short-eared owl. These guys are a little bit smaller, but they do the exact same thing, and they don't usually encounter each other because as the harrier goes to bed on time, he won't see the owl. But occasionally they do interact with each other, and when that happens, there's a battle about whose field is this anyway. So they've got the short-eared owl and the harrier tangling up there. And I don't really know who won this one. Matt sent me those pictures. I don't know if he knew who won, but in this case, the short-eared owl wins. He's carrying some food there. Another one with carrying prey back to the nest. And they have to do a lot of that head turning, just like the other owls, to confirm where their prey is and how far away it is. So here's a nest, and you can see it's just on the ground, and they're about 16 inches long, so it's a pretty decent-sized nest there. Here's our little owlets. Now, let's talk about some owls that you're like. These are migratory, so you don't see them all the time. Now, the next three we're going to talk about, they're here. They're not migratory. All year round you can find them. But again, you have to be in the right place. Talk about our great horn first. That's the fiercest animal in the woods. The fiercest, most aggressive. Seems like they don't have any pain receptors. Nothing really bothers them. They're large, solid owls, about 22 inches long. They only weigh 3 to 4 pounds. You know, a lot of times people blame these owls right here as to taking pets. But think about it. This owl weighs 3 pounds, 3.5 pounds. Is your pet more than that? Now, can they lift more than their weight? Probably not. So I'm not saying they wouldn't attack a pet, but they're not going to be able to carry your pet off. If you're losing a pet due to wildlife, it's more likely a coyote that's taking them. I'm not saying owls can't do it. They're very tough. Like I said, they could not carry it probably up into a tree unless you have a little tiny chihuahua. But you know, if the dog was left out or the cat on its own, it could probably dispatch that animal and take part of it, but it probably wouldn't take the whole thing. So anyway, they get a bad rap because people are afraid that the owls are taking them. Male and female. And the female has even though she's a bigger animal, she has the higher voice because of the way the voice box is designed. In a lot of birds of prey, the female is larger, partly because she has to carry the eggs, but also she does most of the nest tending, and so she doesn't fly as far from the nest, and the male has to go a little farther. So it's really not clear as to why male raptors are smaller than the female partners, but they think it has to do with supplying food. So there's one that we caught looking over the horizon. And I wanted to have you compare side by side the great horned and the long-eared. So if you look at the great horn, it has a white throat patch and it has a lot of speckling on the breast, whereas this long-eared doesn't have the white throat patch, and it's usually is very organized stripes and bars, where this one doesn't have it. Now, if you saw them sitting right next to each other, you'd see how delicate and small this is compared to this one. But they could be confused with just a fast look. And the ear tufts are set wider. We call them ear tufts, but feather tufts. And they're narrower here and longer. Another view just to compare the two. But you can see how they might be confused if you were doing just a quick look at them. But there's a huge difference in sturdiness and size and weight. The great horned owls, I was saying how fierce they are and how they don't seem to feel pain. They will drive an adult bald eagle, which could weigh 10 or 15 pounds off the nest, and they'll say, I'm taking this now, goodbye. They'll take a heron out of the nest, a baby heron out of the nest. They are one of the few animals that will prey on a skunk. Like I say, that scent doesn't bother them at all. If you ever smell skunk up in a tree, remember skunks don't climb. So if there's a skunk smell in a tree, a great horned owl probably took it up there. So I don't know how it tastes, but I'm not sure I want to try that. When people research great horned owls, they actually have to put on a helmet that has facial eyes painted on the back, because the great horned owl will go for the face, and if it's going to protect its nest, it'll go for the back of the helmet instead of the front. Because researchers that are banding the young ones have to be very protected, otherwise they'll go after that person. They don't always have their ear tufts erect. They can have them relax a little bit. And I wanted to show you this one too, because we're talking about the weapons they have to carry on. Look at those talons and toes to grab their prey. Pretty amazing. And with that force that we talked about, once they're snared, there's no escape by that little animal. And so here's one about to capture its breakfast, or maybe its dinner. They can even take prey the size of a small goose. And again, birds are lighter weight than you might think based on how much feathers they have. But it's truly the lord of the forest, the tip top of the food chain. So like I say, nobody, not even a coyote, if an owl's on the ground, a coyote will say, I'm going to leave you alone, because they don't want to mess with the owl, the great horned owl. Listen to this call. Isn't that awful? So you moms out there, if your kid's doing that, you're going to stuff something in that opening, right? Quiet them down. So I think that's why they sound like that. They are one of our first nesting birds. They'll nest in late February or early March. And between the breast of this mother bird and her eggs, they can keep it at 90 degrees when it's below zero and there's snow on their back. And it takes a long time to raise an owl. They're big birds, and they need a lot of food to get to the point where they can be on their own, and it takes a long time to learn how to hunt properly, so they need the whole summer to raise them. And I put this caption on because I'm looking at this owlet, and there's mom or dad, and this one's saying, like, go on, I'm hungry. Well, they do get pretty well fed. But even in this baby, look at the talons here. So if you're a researcher, that could do some damage to you. They have to be really careful on that. And when you see a young owl, and it's a good size one, look at the eye color. That could tell you, even though there's no feather tufts yet, that will tell you it's a great horned owl. If it had brown eyes, it's either a barn or a barred owl. And these are fledglings. They have just popped out of the nest, and they're starting to make their own way. Now, one of our other small owls, it's actually the most common owl, but people don't see them often, is the screech owl. There's two flavors it comes in, the rusty red or the gray. And here's one of their calls. Sounds more like a whinny. And that's their contact call. They do that when they're looking for their partner. And here's their territorial call. The tremolo, we call that. They have one of the most varied diets in the owl kingdom. They'll eat insects, they'll eat worms, they'll eat prey like mice, baby rabbits, what else? Anything that moves, they'll catch other birds. And they actually hang around lights at night because they know there's going to be insects there, and they'll know there'll be bats there. They'll catch bats. They eat about anything they can do, but they can live on worms too, just like robins do. And again, they blend in so well. Sometimes you can have both color morphs in the same clutch. In the northern part of the state, they're usually more of the gray type. In the southern part, they're usually more of the rufous type. And again, they're not very big owls. You might have remembered on the news a few years ago, it was later in the year, somebody found one of these in a mailbox, and the news reporter was saying, oh, look how cute the babies are. It wasn't a baby. It was a full-grown screech owl, but it happened to be in the mailbox for somebody probably roosting there. But it was the wrong time of year to be a baby. And it was fully fledged out like this one, too. So they have to nest in cavities, and sometimes there's a little dispute about who is going to use that cavity. There's a screech owl having a discussion with the woodpecker, and that woodpecker likely made that hole, but who's going to bother an owl with that kind of a beak? They will be seen in grape tangles and shrubbery and evergreens, but usually I see them like this. They're in their cavity peering out, maybe on a warm day. And, of course, we have the young ones here. And, again, if you look at the yellow eyes, that'll tell you, and they're small like that, it'll tell you it's a screech owl. Something neat about the western screech owl, we think maybe the eastern screech owl could do this too, but it hasn't really been documented. But the western screech owl keeps pets. Yeah, they keep their own pets. This is the Texas blind snake. They're not very big. That's as big as they get. But these snakes eat insects, and owl nests can get infested with insects. So this western screech owl captures these, puts them in the nest, it works its way to the bottom, and it's busy eating insects the whole time the eggs are being incubated and the young are in there. And so the snakes keep the nest free of insects, and they let the snake live underneath there. So I consider that keeping a pet. And so we talked about the oriental scops owl, which was found on a Pribilof Island off Alaska, but you can see it looks a lot like our screech owl, so they're closely related. And now we're going to talk about my very favorite owl of all, the barred owl. Supposedly it sounds like "Who Cooks for You?" That's kind of an accent. Who cooks for you all sometimes? But again, look at these brown eyes, which is unusual for owls in our country, and that's how you can identify that even if it's a young one. And the other thing is most owls have a dark bill. This one has a light yellow bill. They about weigh 1.5 pounds, So again, they're not going to be that much of a threat to a pet. They could harass them, but I don't think they're going to do much. And they're about 21 inches long. So they're just a little bit shorter than a great horn, but much lighter than a great horn. And they're more of a swamp type owl. They can be anywhere, of course, but they do like wet forests. And you'll see that in a moment because of some of the food they take. I love their calls too. One of the problems with the barred owl is they take advantage of the situation, and as people are replanting forests, they're even planting forests where there shouldn't be forests, like throughout the Great Plains of the United States and Canada. So there's these woodland islands, and these owls are hopscotching across the Great Plains. They could never do that before, and now they're starting to invade the rainforest in Oregon and Washington where the spotted owl lives, and they're the same genus, different species, same genus, but the barred owl is bigger and more aggressive. So they're eating these endangered spotted owls, and sometimes they're hybridizing with them, so it's diluting the genes of the population. And actually in Oregon and Washington, they're starting to eradicate some of these barred owls that had never been there before, and we made it easy for them to get there. So they're trying to control that because we don't want to lose the spotted owl, which is endangered. Really keeping his eye on something on the ground there. They're pretty skittish. The great horned owl, if you come across one of the trees, it usually just looks down at you and say, yeah, go on, make my day. But the barred owls will fly off. They're not afraid to court very lavishly, though. Wait till you hear this. I love that call, and that is the call that scared the pilgrims out of the forest. They were sure that witches lived out there. Sometimes you get them right on your deck. This is a juvenile. And I said that they liked wetlands. Here's one that looks like he's trying to catch something in the water. How about that one? Wouldn't you like to see that in your bird bath? They do eat crayfish, so that may be what he was looking for. They do eat frogs. They eat snakes. And this one, he caught a fish. There's a little sunfish there. So they're very good anglers. So they're very at home in the wet forest that we have. And here's one in his cavity just looking out over the world. This one's sitting on the front porch. Here's a baby one, the owlet. And I like this picture. They were successfully raised 3 of them. So here's the one that has me a little envious of Matt Valensic because he found this owl when he was in Arizona, which is the rare mottled owl. Looks quite a bit like our barred owl. Again, they would rarely encounter each other because of where they usually inhabit. This one's more northern, this one's southern species, but you can see how they might be confused if they are close at hand. So I want you to keep in mind that those owls are out there, and we hardly notice because many of us don't go traipsing through the forest at night unless we're called on an owl prowl, which I like to do. But they're out there, and so if you open your windows or sit on your porch and you're hearing some of these eerie calls, it might be an owl out there. So I wanted to point out 2 other things before we're done today. One of them is if you like owl calls, the state of Ohio has a CD which has all the owl calls of all the owls in North America on the CD. So you can listen to those and learn the owl calls, and it comes with a little guide here that has owls that have been sighted in Ohio. Talks a little bit about the range and things. And these are free of charge. You just have to have, I think you have to pay shipping, but all you Ohio taxpayers, maybe you Florida people didn't pay for these, but we Ohio taxpayers paid for these, so they're yours if you want them. You just have to get in touch with ODNR. And my favorite book about owls is called The Enigma of the Owl by Ewan and Tipling. I love this book. It doesn't have all the owls of the world, but it starts off each one with photographs, and it talks about where their distribution is, what their clutch size is, what their egg size is, what they eat. It has all kinds of neat pictures in here, so if you really are into owls, this is really one you should have on yourself because it's a lot of fun, and I do a lot of research just with this one book here. If someone has a question about an owl, I oftentimes look at this place first to answer the question. Well, thank you for attending tonight. I always love talking about owls or any kind of wildlife, but owls are one of my favorites, and give me the opportunity to get it all out there. Thank you. there's any questions or any encounters you want to describe, yes?
I just wondered, what is the benefit of their ear tufts, even though they're not ear tufts?
Yeah, it's camouflage, actually, because if you can imagine a snag, a tree of snag, and if you had a nice round head, you would probably stand out. But if those little